There are moments in American democracy when the machinery of accountability, slow, imperfect, often frustrating, suddenly grinds into sharp, undeniable focus. This week was one of those moments. Jamieson Greer, the United States Trade Representative and the man most directly responsible for implementing Donald Trump's sweeping global tariff regime, appeared before the House Ways and Means Committee. It was a hearing that almost didn't happen. For roughly a year, Greer had resisted testifying before this committee. When he finally sat down under oath, Democrats were not there to exchange pleasantries. What followed was one of the most revealing cross-examinations of a senior Trump official in recent memory. A sustained, methodical interrogation that exposed contradictions at the heart of the administration's trade policy, raised serious questions about market manipulation and insider trading, and left the trade representative visibly struggling to defend positions that, by his own repeated evasions, he appeared unable to justify. The hearing was not a spectacle for its own sake. It was substantive, it was pointed, and it mattered. Because the policies being challenged are not abstract, they are costing American families, American farmers, and American small businesses real money right now. By the end of the 5-hour session, Greer had been unable to say whether American families deserved refunds for tariffs a court has ruled illegal. He had been confronted with evidence of suspicious market-moving trades made minutes before administration announcements. He had been shown, one by one, that virtually every major economic institution in the country, conservative and liberal alike, contradicts his claims that tariffs are not raising consumer prices. This is the story of what happened in that hearing room, and why it matters to every American paying a bill, buying groceries, or running a business today. To understand what happened at Wednesday's hearing, you need to understand what Jamieson Greer's job actually is. As the United States Trade Representative, Greer is not a peripheral figure. He is the architect and enforcer of the Trump administration's tariff policy, a policy that has fundamentally disrupted global trade relationships, triggered retaliatory measures from dozens of countries, and, by most independent economic assessments, increased costs for American consumers and businesses. The tariffs at issue did not emerge from a careful legislative process. They were imposed by executive authority, primarily under emergency statutes, a legal approach that has since been challenged in court. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that called into question the legality of the administration's blanket tariff structure, describing them as exceeding the bounds of the statutory authority invoked to impose them. That ruling is the legal foundation underlying much of what Democrats pressed Greer on at Wednesday's hearing. Greer had previously declined to appear before the House Ways and Means Committee for nearly a full year, an absence that itself became a point of contention. The committee has jurisdiction over trade and tax policy, making oversight of the Trade Representative's office a direct part of its mandate. Greer's reluctance to testify was, for Democratic members, part of a broader pattern of the administration resisting congressional scrutiny. When he finally did appear, the Democrats on the committee had done their homework. They arrived not with vague complaints, but with specific quotes Greer had made in prior testimony, documented timelines of suspicious trades correlated with policy announcements, letters that had gone unanswered, and a list of economic institutions, from Yale Budget Lab to Moody's to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, all saying the same thing about tariff costs that Greer was determined to deny. The stage was set for a hearing that would be, in the most technical and procedural sense, exactly what oversight is supposed to look like. The first Democrat to make an impression was Congressman Morell Horford, whose cross-examination was notable for its discipline and precision. Horford opened with a direct question. Do American families deserve refunds for the higher prices they paid under tariffs the Supreme Court has now ruled illegal? It was a yes or no question. Greer did not answer it. He pivoted to inflation statistics from the Biden administration. Horford immediately recognized the deflection and stated, on the record, that he was taking the non-answer as a no. What followed was more damaging. Horford introduced into the congressional record 10 articles documenting a pattern of suspicious market activity correlated with Trump administration tariff announcements. The specifics are stark. 18 minutes before a tariff pause last year, traders placed large bets that markets would surge. 46 minutes before an announcement about Iran negotiations, an enormous short position was taken in the oil market. Horford put it plainly, "Markets do not move like that by accident." He called for an investigation and noted that a letter signed by 130 Democratic members requesting answers about this pattern had received no response from Greer's office. Greer's response was to point to existing ethics disclosure forms. Horford's rejoinder was the obvious one. This is not a paperwork issue. If someone with access to non-public, market-moving information is trading on that information, existing forms do not stop them. Congresswoman Linda Sanchez pressed Greer on small businesses that had already shuttered, companies that, unlike large corporations, lacked the resources to apply for tariff exemptions or hire attorneys to seek refunds. She also raised the case of ArcelorMittal, a European steel company that reportedly gifted the Trump administration $30 million worth of foreign steel for a White House ballroom renovation. 2 days after Trump praised the steel at a donor event, ArcelorMittal received a new tariff exemption. Greer said he was unaware of any link between the donation and the exemption, but was unable to say whether the White House renovation should have used American-made materials. Congressman Tom Suozzi pursued Greer on the basic economic question, are tariffs increasing prices for American consumers? Greer said no. Suozzi then read aloud assessments from the Tax Foundation, $1,000 per household annually, Yale Budget Lab, $20,400 per household, a Manhattan Chamber of Commerce analysis, $4,200 per household, and Moody's Investment Services, all reaching the same conclusion. Greer disagreed with each one. When Suozzi pointed out that the Tax Foundation and U.S. Chamber of Commerce are conservative institutions, Greer responded by calling them offshoring institutions. The cross-examination was pointed and effective, but the most consequential questions raised at Wednesday's hearing are not ultimately about any single exchange. They are about systemic accountability, about whether the administration is operating within legal boundaries, whether market-sensitive information is being protected, and whether ordinary Americans are being harmed for the benefit of insiders. Start with the legal question. The Supreme Court's ruling on the administration's tariff authority is not a minor procedural matter. It goes to the constitutional question of which branch of government controls trade policy. The tariffs were imposed using emergency statutory authority in ways that, the court found, exceeded what Congress had actually authorized. That means every American consumer who paid higher prices as a result of those tariffs paid them under a legal framework that has now been found wanting. The question of refunds is therefore not merely a political talking point. It is a genuine policy and legal question that Greer refused to engage with directly. Then, there is the market manipulation question. The pattern Horford described, large, precisely timed trades made immediately before major policy announcements, is not something the committee invented. The articles submitted into the congressional record are from credible news outlets. The question of who knew about these announcements before they were made public and whether anyone with that knowledge traded on it is exactly the kind of question that securities and ethics law is designed to address. Greer's answer, that ethics forms exist, is not an investigation. The accountability gap is broader still. Greer's office had not responded to a letter signed by 130 members of Congress. He expressed uncertainty about whether decision memos justifying specific tariff actions could be made public. He could not confirm how many completed trade deals his office had delivered. He cited 18 against a prior claim of 90 deals in 90 days, a figure Greer then disputed ever having said before the exchange moved on. Congresswoman Delbene asked Greer to commit to publishing the decision memos that underpin Section 301 tariff investigations. Greer did not commit. He said he would consult his general counsel. She noted that she was unaware of any legal authority preventing their release. These are not peripheral matters. They are the substance of democratic oversight, the right of Congress, and through Congress, the American public, to know how executive power is being used and on what legal basis. A congressional hearing is not a verdict. Jameson Greer left Wednesday's session still in his post, still implementing the same tariff policy, still representing the same administration. Nothing was resolved in a single afternoon. But hearings matter. They matter because they create a public record. They matter because the questions that go unanswered on the record become the foundation for follow-up investigations, legislative referrals, and, in some cases, legal action. And they matter because the American public, watching, is entitled to see how the people executing policy on their behalf respond when asked direct questions under oath. What the public saw on Wednesday was a senior official unable to say whether families harmed by illegal tariffs deserve compensation, unable to adequately explain suspicious pre-announcement trading activity, unable to account for a significant gap between promised and delivered trade deals. Disagreeing simultaneously with Moody's, the Tax Foundation, Yale's budget researchers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, BlackRock's CEO, and the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, essentially every credible economic voice that has assessed the tariffs' impact on consumer prices. Several concrete threads now hang open. The letter from 130 Democratic members requesting information about the Liberation Day tariff pause still awaits a response. Requests for the publication of decision memos justifying specific tariffs have been made on the record. The market manipulation and insider trading questions now exist in the congressional record and can form the basis of formal referrals to the SEC or the Department of Justice. Congresswoman Sue spoke for many of her constituents when she described what she hears every day she is home: rising prices on food, fertilizer, and fuel, not abstractions, groceries, and gas. She asked Greer to hear that message and carry it back. Whether it is carried back, and whether the administration adjusts course, remains to be seen. What is not in doubt is that the questions asked this week, about legality, about transparency, about who knew what before markets moved, are not going away. Accountability, in a democracy, tends to be slow, but it tends, eventually, to arrive. Subscribe for continuing coverage as this story develops.